Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, the topic that we're going to discuss is Consumers Equilibrium, Law of Equi-Marginal Utility. First of all, we have what is Consumers Equilibrium. To begin with, let's say what is a consumer? A consumer is someone who consumes something. That could be any good or service that he consumes. Now, equilibrium is a state of rest or a state of balance at which a person is getting maximum satisfaction, maximum benefit, and this is the state from which a person would not want to shift from. Because if this state is disturbed, then consumers' satisfaction, consumers' benefits might also get reduced. So, consumer only wants to stay in a position of equilibrium. Though it is an ideal situation and in real world it does not happen so often, consumers equilibrium is also known as consumer optimization, which refers to the point at which consumer maximizes their utility or satisfaction given their budget constraint and the prices of goods and services available in the market. In simple terms, it is the ideal combination of goods and services that a consumer can afford to purchase, leading to the highest level of satisfaction. So, consumer's equilibrium is a state or is a psychological point where a consumer is very much satisfied. He gets his maximum satisfaction at this point, and he would not want to move away from it, because if he would move, then his satisfaction will decrease. This point is where the consumer is having the optimum, the perfect mix of goods and services, and he is completely stable and satisfied. Next, we have consumers' equilibrium for a single commodity. When we talk about a single commodity, only one good, then how do we represent consumers' equilibrium? How can we express it in some mathematical form? So, as we've read, marginal utility is the additional utility, additional satisfaction that a person gets from consuming a good. So, when consumer's marginal utility is equal to the price of the good, then we say that the consumer is in equilibrium when we are talking about a single commodity, right? This concept of marginal utility really helps in understanding what a consumer actually wants. Next, we have consumers equilibrium for multiple commodities. Now, when there are more than one commodities, more than one goods or services, then how does the consumer reach his equilibrium? That we're going to study now. So, to study this, we study the law of equi-marginal utility, which helps us to understand and how a consumer can reach his equilibrium when he is buying multiple commodities. The law of equi-marginal utility states that the consumer will distribute his money income between the goods in such a way that the utility derived from the last rupee spent on each good is equal. In other words, a consumer is in an equilibrium position when the marginal utility of money spent on each good is equal. So let's suppose that a consumer is buying two or three commodities. Now, when the consumer will spend last amount of money on each of these commodities, then his marginal utility that he derives from these commodities must be equal to the last amount of money that he spends on the good. So that is how the consumer reaches his equilibrium in the case of multiple commodities. To represent it mathematically, we have MUM, that is marginal utility of money. How much utility a person derives with an additional unit of money, it is known as marginal utility of money. Marginal utility of money should be equal to the ratio of marginal utility of a good, say X good, divided by the price of good X. When there are more than one commodities, then this ratio should also be equal to the marginal utility of good Y divided by the price of good Y. This is the case for two commodities. If there are more than two commodities, suppose there are n number of commodities, then this mathematical representation becomes like this, where all the ratios of marginal utility and the price of each and every good is equal to each other and the marginal utility of money. To study this law, we also have to study the assumptions that the law is based on. First of all, the cardinal measurability of utility in terms of money. Again, we are still studying the cardinal utility analysis, so here obviously the utility will be measured in cardinal numbers, and here in this particular theory the cardinal measurability of utility is in terms of money. Then we have utilities of different goods can be compared, as we studied in the previous law that we discussed, the law of diminishing marginal utility. There also these assumptions were holding. They are almost same for both of the laws, but we'll go through these assumptions in this theory again. So the utility of different goods can be compared, meaning that if we have a combo of goods, then we are able to compare the utilities derived from each and every good. The hypothesis of independent utilities. Now again, the utilities derived from each and every good is independent of the utility of each other. The utilities that we are deriving from each and every good are independent from each other, meaning that even though the goods can be substitute goods, the goods can be complementary goods, but the utilities that a good is giving to a person does not depend on its substitute or its complement or any other good per se. So these utilities are independent of each other. Then utilities are additive. This means since we are measuring the utility in cardinal terms, then the utility is derived from every good that a consumer is consuming. Those utilities are additive. We can add them all and we can study how much total utility a person got. Then the constancy of marginal utility of money. Here again, this assumption is a very fundamental assumption of this theory, which says that the marginal utility or satisfaction that we are deriving from money is constant, it is same, which means that even if we get richer or we get poorer, it does not affect us in any way. Money's utility to us remains same throughout under any condition. Then we have consumers are rational, they use the introspection method. Consumers are rational, they can calculate, they can know, they can introspect, and they can understand what utility they could derive from different combinations of good, and what and how much satisfaction they'll get from these goods. Since we've already studied the law of diminishing marginal utility, we know that as the consumer will go on consuming more units of a good, the the marginal utility that the person will get in the second table, we have the ratio of marginal utility to that of price for both of the goods, good X and good Y. We can see this ratio is also decreasing throughout. But what to note at this point is you can see that when the three units of good Y is consumed, and when 5 units of good X is consumed, then this ratio of marginal utility to that of the price for both the goods are equal. We had studied earlier here here that these ratios must be equal in order for a consumer to reach his equilibrium. So when a consumer is consuming 3 units of good Y and 5 units of good X, then the consumer will be in equilibrium because the last money spent on each of the goods is yielding the consumer the same satisfaction, as we can see from this table. So the consumer will buy a bundle of goods where he will purchase 3 units of good Y and 5 units of good X, and by doing this, he will reach his equilibrium and will maximize his personal satisfaction, his utility, and his benefit. We can represent this law diagrammatically as well. That is given as this diagram. We can see that this line This line signifies the equi-marginal utility. How? Because on x-axis we have quantity of x and quantity of y. Then on y-axis of the first part of the diagram we have mux by px. That is the ratio of marginal utility to price of good x. And on y-axis of the second diagram we have the ratio of mu to that of price of good y. Here, when the consumer is consuming 4 quantities of good X, this ratio for the consumer is 7 here. And when he is consuming 2 units of good Y, this ratio for consumer is again 7. So for this consumer, the bundle of goods would be 4 units of good X and 2 units of good Y, and with this bundle the consumer would be maximizing his satisfaction and he would be in equilibrium at this bundle. So this is the law of equimarginal utility. Moving up, we have the significance of this law. This law helps us to understand the consumer choice, how a consumer behaves, what goods he purchases, and what determines his behavior, his choices, we can understand through this law. Then, optimal resource allocation, that how a consumer allocates his good in such a way that the combination is optimal, is perfect, and yields him the maximum satisfaction. Then we can also understand the market demand through this law, because we can realize how different persons buy different goods and what allocations they buy for themselves. This law can be very helpful for the producers or suppliers in particular, because it helps them to understand how the market demand of a good behaves. We can understand the pricing strategies, that why some producers or suppliers or shopkeepers are particularly pricing their goods in certain way. This also helps in welfare analysis. Through this law, the producers will understand what a consumer actually wants. So they will produce such goods that will maximize the consumer's benefit and will keep their prices at such levels that will yield the consumer the maximum benefit. Budgeting and personal finance. Now we can also understand through this law how a person uses his budget, how he finances his goods, and how he determines what goods he wants to purchase with his given resources, given income, and other factors. Then understanding consumer preference, of course, that we said consumer choice. This law helps us understand the consumer preference, how a consumer chooses goods, what goods he prefers, what goods will give him the maximum satisfaction. Next up, we have limitations of law of equimarginal utility. As I told you in the last video, the video of law of diminishing marginal utility. Here again, we can bring out the limitations of this law based on the assumptions also. More there would be assumptions of a theory, the more the theory would be further from reality. So let's begin with our limitations of law of equi-marginal utility. First, consumer is not so rational and calculating. We can say that consumer is not rational because you would have noticed that when we go shopping, we generally do not calculate that how much satisfaction a good will give us and how much utility they would not give us. We just simply buy a good because we like it or it is a necessity for us. We cannot ignore not buying it just because its prices are high. So the consumer cannot be rational and calculating at all the times as the theory suggests. Then the consumers spend particular amount of money on different commodities, whether the particular allocation maximizes their satisfaction or not. As I said previously, that when we go for buying goods, we do not actually care that much about the prices of a good. If we like a good or if that good is a necessity for us, we will have to buy it by hook or crook. We'll buy it in any circumstances. So, consumers are not very calculating. Then again, measuring utility cardinally or in terms of money is not possible because we cannot say that a particular good is giving us like 4 units of utility or 5 units of utility or 100 units of utility. We cannot say that. We can just say that a good is, we cannot say that. So, this assumption also holds incorrect in this case. Then sometimes goods are indivisible, so comparing their utility with other goods becomes impossible. As the law assumes that the utilities are comparable, in some cases the goods are indivisible, they are very big. We cannot compare them. For example, suppose we are buying a car and we are buying a pen. How can you compare the utility that you derive from a car and a pen? Car is something that is indivisible. We cannot divide its units and determine what kind of utility those units of divided car are giving us. So this assumption also becomes incorrect. Hypothesis of independent utility is wrong. We cannot say that the utilities of different goods are independent of each other because here we are ignoring network externalities or the substitutes and complementary goods or the effect that substitutes and complementary goods have on each other. These goods are related and their utilities are not independent of each other, they depend on each other. So, this theory also holds wrong when we talk about network externalities or substitutes or complementary goods. Then, assumption of constant marginal utility is not valid. Of course, the marginal utility derived from money cannot be constant. If we are becoming richer, we are getting more and more of money, the marginal utility of money for us will decrease because the more and more we'll have money, the lesser we'll care about spending it. And if we'll be becoming poorer, the lesser amount of money that we'll have will be very precious for us. So, this assumption becomes invalid. It does not explain the composite character of price effect. Now, composite character of price effect means that the price effect is a sum of two other effects, income effect and substitution effect. This might sound alien to you right now, but we'll study it in our following videos. Then marginal utility analysis assumes too much and explains too less. Of course, we have been assuming too much. As soon as we just state the law and we represent it diagrammatically, the law in itself becomes complete and it just explains that particular thing and does not explain much about, like we said, it does not explain price effect or other phenomena in economics. So this was our law of equimarginal utility. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and also don't forget to hit on the bell icon. Thank you for watching. Bye.